Good evening, everyone. How are you doing today? Okay, now we're back online. How is everything, guys? Uh, Thank you for tuning in back again on Entrepreneur's Kitchen. Today, I have a very special guest, a good friend from the other end of the world again. For him, it's around lunchtime. It's Landon Ross, the artist whose work I really admire. I adore his paintings, his you know. Ideas around what art is and what the work of an artist should embody. And we will talk about creativity and art in general while we're, preparing our foods. And also, today we have the Twitter channel to ask questions. So please tune in to Twitter and use @reply the Mindshift TV. And please welcome with me Landon Ross. Landon, how are you doing?
I'm good. It's nice to see you again.
So nice to see you again too. It's been a long time.
I know. It's been
Yeah.
over a year.
Yeah, you always come to Europe and we kind of, we
Yeah,
always
well,
take
in the
the.
last year, it's been like in and out very, very quickly, which is very frustrating because I've never actually spent much time in Salzburg. Actually, the only time I spent in Salzburg was for the 1 hour that I came into the talk.
I
So,
know it was like 2 hours. I know.
yeah.
Yeah. So, Landon, what are you going to be preparing? You're such a creative person, so I'm kind of looking forward to your recipe as
Oh,
well.
well, first, thank you for giving me an excuse to drink 2 hours earlier than normal at 11:59 a.m. But since I'm gonna try and do a crappy workout outside after this, and I only want to be slightly lubricated, I'm gonna make like a mimosa and nothing heavier.
Oh,
Although, yeah, I'm making it with oranges from the tree outside and this natural Mexican sparkling wine, which I'm sure you have
oh,
in great
interesting.
supply in Salzburg.
Actually, I don't think so.
Oh, I'm joking. It's the same time this year. I know somebody brought it.
Was that your
Um,
first joke for?
yeah,
Awesome. Well, I'm going to be preparing something sweet, just to kind of finish the day because it's been a long time in our case here. By the way, it's actually holidays here. I don't know, is well, shut down, so everything is like
yeah.
holidays.
I mean, uh, basically every day feels like a staycation,
Yeah.
although it has a little bit of a different quality to it. But no, I don't. I'm not sure if the day after Easter is a holiday here. But
Okay. Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, so for us, it's also not a holiday. So, um, Landon, but I really want to jump into the discussion because I find your ideas around art so fascinating, and I think people will really gain so many insights when once you start talking about how you see art. Um, what is art?
well, I think there are a few criteria for what fine art is or can be, or if you want to speak about art more broadly, and it's the way that we talk about the world in a way that creates content, but it's it's free from it can be about whatever discourse you may like. If science is the way that we find out about the world, I'd say that's like predictive and descriptive, but art is reflective. And it's much more moving and much more meaningful to most people um, to engage with topics that way rather than, say, reading a textbook, for instance, or studying something in specific.
Mm.
So for me, like personally, in the work that I make, I like to tell origin stories, just like I believe artists have been doing for thousands of years. But the ones that I like to tell are epistemically distinct from the ones that artists have been telling for thousands of years, because of course the only origin stories they could make art in the service of were mythological, or sort of written and invented by human beings, or religious, in other words. And now we have a different way of knowing, and there's a lot more to engage with respect to naturalism and like so. My work won't be about Mother Mary and Child. It'll be about cosmological constants, or nucleosynthesis, or quantum gravity, or these sorts of things, which are also, of course, very fundamental origin stories.
Yeah.
And also very, very inspiring and beautiful, and elegant.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I also know that you have a very particular view on what beauty is. But before going into that discussion, which is also very interesting, I want to just take a step back. When we were visiting your workshop, your atelier in Los Angeles, you were also using very interesting materials that kind of not only speak of the origin stories in the scientific terms, but also make them really make them visible. So can you talk about the material? What does it mean to you?
I think you're talking about a few of the series that are made and they're built out of materials which are restricted to the elements created in the last 3 seconds of a type 2 supernova, which is which is the last 3 seconds of a star's death and explosion. And the reason I do that, one, I mean, the materials are incredibly beautiful, and I like this idea of the sovereignty of the material, meaning the material is sort of doing a lot of the work for me, because it is itself interesting, and they are single atoms. I mean, they're not compounds, they're elements. So they're really very, very simple chemicals, in other words, and materials. And so in this case, it's sort of reducing the medium down to a very specific regime and seeing what comes out of that. So I make drawings with with elements from the last 3 seconds, and some things that are sort of in between paintings and sculptures, but that exist.
What materials are those? Can you just tell us?
It's a little bit narrower than everything after iron on the periodic table, but mine tend to be the heavier elements: gallium, palladium, platinum, gold, bismuth. Bismuth is the heaviest non-radioactive element, so if I wanted to go higher on the periodic table, we'd start cancer from the artwork. So that's where it stops.
Where do you get those?
What's that?
Where do you get the material?
Depends which. Some are easier to come by. They can be expensive. Like, bismuth isn't cheap to work with, but it's available from metal supplies here, and it comes in big slabs, ingots, and I sort of melt it down, and I have a tile machine that I built to pour the molten metal into to get the shapes that I want. And other things I order from China, or
Is it now difficult for you to get onto materials? I mean, if you have like suppliers outside of the US, everything is being shut down. How does that affect you?
I haven't run into that yet, because I have enough to continue making things, but also like right now I'm focused on making smaller scale works, because my studio is full and I can't ship right now. There's no framing and no shipping happening right now. So so there's no space to put anything else big. So right now I'm working on drawings and smaller scale paintings and things that I can occupy myself with during this time. So hopefully this doesn't last very long, but I don't know. My guess is no, I couldn't get those things if I wanted to.
So what is this whole Corona shutdown thing doing with your creativity? When you say now you're focusing on drawings, now you're doing smaller scale, so how does that limitation have an effect on your creativity, or does it?
I'm not gonna lie, it's been hard. Like, you would think this extra time and you can just sit at home and focus on making a whole bunch of new stuff, or be in the studio and make a whole bunch of new stuff. The way that it sort of like violently disrupted routine, which for me actually is quite important. And like I like to like wake up, go to the studio, leave, go to the market, buy food for dinner, go to the gym, etc., come home. Like that's my routine. And so it's very jarring. It's very jarring. But in the last like week and a half, I've sort of hit a better stride with it, and now I'm quite happier. Actually, like having done good work last week, I feel so much better because it was really getting on my nerves.
What is good work for you? What do you mean when you have a good day of
Well, if you produce
working?
something you're happy with, or if you feel like you came up with something new, or you know, like earlier this week, I was writing, which I haven't done in a really, really long time for a new art publication, and that was really fulfilling.
Hmm. What are you writing right now?
It's related in some sense to the talk that we did a year ago or just over at Sonophilia, which was um, it's basically, so when you think about a theory of beauty, there have been two camps for millennia. In ancient Greece, um, the Platonists, Plato and Aristotle, even though they disagreed on what beauty was, they disagreed on its definition, both agreed that it did not exist within the observer, that it was
Ah.
actually a quality in the world that we were picking up on. And
Hmm.
their idea of what it was that it was some sort of platonic perfection that when we saw approximated, uh, engaged or moved or tickled us. So it was the approximation of the perfect
Hmm.
symmetry, and so on.
Hmm.
Which I vibrate to because I have a slightly different view, which I'll set aside for a moment because I should get to the competing view, which is the 18th century view, when philosophers were basically like, beauty cannot exist outside of the observer. It is completely subjective. And I think
Hmm.
that's where we get this whole thing of beauty is in the eye of the beholder, which I actually
Hmm.
disagree with. I don't think beauty is either or. I think it's both. It's agent dependent, but it's not arbitrarily distributed. Beauty isn't in the eye of the beholder, taste is. So I think that there is a great deal of overlap in what human beings find beautiful and, you know, likely other animals, which, you know, and here I'm not talking about human beauty. I'm talking about when
Hmm.
you're looking at a galaxy, when you're looking at a sunset, when you're looking at uh, Agnes Martin painting, a Rothko, you know, those sorts of things.
Hmm.
And I think it has something to do with slightly broken symmetries because they're always more interesting than the perfect symmetries.
Hmm.
So the Greeks may or may not have had it wrong. Um, I think there's some sort of compatibilist view where you can have basically an agent dependent um, a phenomena, right,
Hmm.
that is phenomenological, meaning it's happening inside the viewer, but it's dependent also on a pattern in the universe, right? It's
Hmm.
not equally distributed in any space. Even if we're talking about conceptual beauty or aesthetic beauty, you know, meaning like something that hits the eye, I still believe it's not arbitrarily distributed.
Hmm.
And so, in order to explain that, I think my take is it's reflecting some deeper truth about the
Hmm.
universe. Because even if the physical laws of the universe are symmetrical, the actual universe isn't.
Hmm.
Um, there are a lot of asymmetries in the universe that are almost perfect symmetries, but they're a little bit off. For instance, matter and antimatter created at the Big Bang. There was slightly more matter created, and therefore the annihilation event that happened directly after didn't delete all of the things
Hmm.
and left our universe with a residue of matter, and that's why we're here. Which is crazy when you think about that. Slight little imbalance is all of the stuff that we see today.
Hmm.
And then mass is also based on another asymmetry, and they're very fundamental, these asymmetries. I'm sorry, I shouldn't call them asymmetries. I should call them broken symmetries because they are not
Hmm.
asymmetric. They're almost perfect symmetric. They're just not perfectly symmetric. And I think when you make something in art, for instance, if you make something that's perfectly symmetric, as if it was generated by a computer or an AI, it's really not interesting. It doesn't look good. It's very boring. And I think that, like, you take an Agnes Martin painting. I don't know if you're familiar with this artist, but she does this very meticulous. It's all so precise, but it's done by hand, and so there's that imperfection, and that is restraint. That's what makes it so interesting as a surface.
That's actually really interesting that you mention, computer art or art done by AI. We just had recently David Hansen, who created this humanoid robot called Sophia. She's quite famous now, and they're also infusing her with some algorithms, so she will be able to do art or something that comes closer, and they're really working on her motor possibilities, so she could even maybe play an instrument and things like that. And interestingly, when you're programming something like that, you also try to infuse some coincidence and some things that look like mistakes, so the computer becomes a little more random.
Right, and so those things are programmed mistakes. So I actually don't think that AI is going to be able to produce what we recognize as truly good art until it has the capacity for metaphor, which is a super strange thing to map, but is also, I think, a reflection of some cosmic fundamentality. The things that are like emergently like each other, that aren't literally like each other. We talked about this before. Juliet is the sun. Okay, you understand what Shakespeare means, but an AI wouldn't immediately, no matter if you're Chinese, French, German, Austrian. Juliet is the sun. You get it. An AI is going to say, okay, well, she's a burning ball of hydrogen at the center of the solar system. I mean, this like topological mapping of one concept to another is really strange, and I think it's at the fundament of our capacity to do higher level thinking in general, even like scientific thinking, artistic thinking, the capacity for metaphors. I don't know. I'm sure AI will arrive at some point, but I think programming imperfection isn't actually the thing.
Well, yeah, I also find it quite interesting, because when we think about AI art, I don't know whether they were familiar with this, but one of our friends, Ahmed El Gamal, did an experiment a couple of years ago at Art Basel, and when they showed people paintings that were generated by AI, without telling them that those paintings were generated by AI, of course, most people were not able to tell the difference. But the interesting thing happened afterwards. Once they were told that those paintings were created by AI, people actually got mad because they were really angry. They felt cheated because they were already able to connect with those works emotionally. So then comes the question into mind: does that matter actually who creates the art, if you're able to connect in an emotional way?
No, and I think eventually it will happen, right? I think it matters in certain respects. I mean, I think if you're looking for art as a human artifact, then what you're getting from AI may be very moving and valuable, but it's not going to be the human artifact. The human story, in other words. It will be the story of our progeny because we created them. But I don't know. I mean, that's my intuition.
But when we think about what you just said about beauty, what beauty is or might be, what does your theory do with our understanding of masterworks? Because masterworks are like, this universal, as if there is a universal truth on beauty upon which everybody agrees, and those are, those are the works that, yeah. Go ahead.
That is actually, I think, even more difficult. I think that they all would sort of fit into this compatibilist theory of beauty. I think that there's a reason, again, like this huge overlap in what we agree is exceptional, but there's something else, and that's a theory of quality, which is really hard to figure out. When you're like at the store and you're picking things out and you pick out something and like it's obviously the most expensive thing and you're like, oh yeah, of course, the one that I like. I think it was Sean who brought that example up. I mean, this example of quality, not necessarily of beauty, but somehow it's very hard to define, but we get it when we see it. We get it when we see it. And so I think that masterworks have many number of things happening at once. They're also conceptually and historically beautiful, right? Because they're engaged with more than the purely retinal aspect of this. And I do believe that there's like conceptual symmetry. I believe that there's a whole bunch of these things working at once. I don't know. I would have to think about that more. But I mean, I think you have to know German. You have to speak German in order to read like Goethe and like understand why it's so beautiful in its original language. And I think you do have to have a vocabulary for fine art to truly understand, oh, well, this piece is very good. It's very, very good. And maybe someone who didn't have that vocabulary isn't really clued in on it yet. I mean, like if you go to the museum and you look at the Cy Twombly without a vocabulary for art, you know, you're going to get these annoying comments like, well, I could have done that. My kid could have. It's actually not true. Like, it's very hard to do that. And, you know, if you can't speak the languages, you don't necessarily understand the poetry of a sentence.
I mean, we have 3 really interesting questions here on Twitter. People, if you want to ask questions on art and beauty, here is Landon Ross. So tune on to the Mindshift TV on Twitter to ask questions. Please @reply. So one question, because you spoke of broken symmetries, is about what is your view of fractals?
I think that's like a interesting aspect of the universe's iterations of itself. I mean, there are repeating patterns at different scales. It's a beautiful thing to think about. I don't think that they're they're not very moving to me, again, because they're utterly precise.
Interesting.
If you have any slight deviation, if you have any slight imperfection in a fractal, you don't have a fractal, because it will magnify the imperfection as well as everything else, and it won't be a fractal. It has to be mathematically perfect in order for it to be a fractal. I mean, it's interesting for a screensaver, but that's about it. I don't. No.
That's very interesting. So another question is the act of creativity always results? Does the act of creativity always results from an origin story?
No.
Okay.
I think no, not at all. I think the way that I'm built is usually like curious and engaged and thinking about those sorts of things. But like the way that creativity happens, I don't know if it's the same for everyone, but for me, it's like, it's not directed, right? It's like, what a cliche, like you're in the shower and then you're like, oh, that would be cool. Like that would be that or a cool idea. And then somehow, however, it ends up being made. And then I retroactively look at it and I'm like, well, obviously that makes perfect sense because it's so me. And it's like, obviously, it ends up coming out that way.
Do you have a routine?
80 to 85% of my work is about origin stories in that thread. You know, there's other stuff. I make silly things. I make neon signs.
Do you have a routine, a daily routine? I mean, you said you're in your you're in your patterns and you feel at home to work. You know, you leave home, you go to your atelier, but also when you start your work.
Oh, you mean for making routines of making work? Depends
Yeah.
for what. So like for some, the things that I make actually span a total spectrum of top down or bottom up creation. So like the cosmogony drawings that I make, which are abstract and they're very sort of fine and delicate with these elements. That's built from a totally bottom up process that is completely random, like the drawing that I'll do on top of this splatter of carbon, which is completely random coming out of the syringe where it's shot out of. Like then it guides my drawing and who knows where it's going to end up. That's a really organic bottom up process. Whereas some of the panel paintings, like those, I don't know if you saw those structured, like geometric panel paintings with the meteorites and elements on them. And those, like, I will make the mock up on Photoshop, decide what image is going to be the oil painting in front of it. And then once it's executed, you would not see the difference between the mock-up, which is digital, and the actual thing, because it's really executed exact.
Okay. Very
And
interesting.
the blackboards, those are in the middle because it's like a concept. It's my concept, but then my hand never touches those pieces. Only the scientists that I work with touch those pieces. So there's this whole spectrum of how it just really depends what the work is. That which I mean, but yes, for each sort of series, there's a routine. There's an order.
So you work very often with scientists. What is your criteria in choosing the scientists? How do you convince them that their work suddenly becomes a piece of art? What do they think about this?
Well, I don't know if I've convinced them that their work is art. I don't think. I mean, how do I find them? Well, a lot. I mean, like community here in LA, the Caltech community in LA is really rich. Sean Carroll, who is a dear friend at this point, has helped with that, as a number of other people have. And I don't know. I've actually been really touched because a lot of things that I like proposed, I thought were going to get shot down, or people would be like, I'm too busy, but actually it's only been positive, and it's only been I've only found very willing sort of collaborators.
I mean, what do you do once you approach a scientist who is usually drowning in their own work? You're drowning in your work. What is the first conversation look? What does the first conversation look like?
Well, I'll tell you the funny story, which was the very start of the hieroglyphs series, when I had admired Sean Carroll years and years and read his work, and of course knew who he was and seen him all the time on TV and reading his books and how well he explained everything and how generally magnetic he was. And I saw him at a party, a Caltech party, and I went up to him and I said, "Look, I've had this idea for this series. It's like a collaboration. It will take almost none of your time." And he said, "That's what I like to hear," in his quintessential Sean Carroll voice. And I said, "Okay, so I'll email you." And then I did, and he didn't respond. Like, he didn't respond first. So, I mean, I was livid. I was like, well, he could have said no, or I'm too busy, or I'm not really into this idea, and that would have been better, but this is just really outrageous. And then, of course, I was about to give up and just try and find like a postdoc student or someone to do this idea. And then I got an email like, wait, this was really in my backlog. I'm so sorry. I would love to do it. From that, the beginning of a truly great friendship, and one of our best friends fulfilling sort of journey.
Yeah, and then now you're working.
And since then, it's really been really heartening to see people be interested in it. And look, like a lot of these people are doing incredibly important work that most people don't get to see. I always tell the story of the Voyager mission, when people ask why I do what I do surrounding the discourses that I do. And it's because, you know, that it's very famously, the Voyager mission was the most sort of successful mission we ever sent into space, in terms of the science, in terms of like the new horizons, right? The science. And everyone was talking about it, and nobody was talking about the science. And everyone at JPL was very annoyed because no one was talking about the instruments that they built that was teaching us all this stuff. They were talking about what? They were talking about Carl Sagan's golden record that he glued onto the thing. And it's because that was the story of us. This was a very moving idea. The poetry of sending out, you know, our great art, the songs of the whales, the sort of, you know, stellar location, which may have been a bad idea. Like all of the things about us, that was our story, and that's what really moves people. So, you know, art stories move people. So it can be about whatever, but can be about, you know, politics, race, you know, any number of cultural things. It can also be about sort of ontologies and origins and all of those things. I mean, I'd say for the most part, art in the last millennia has been about origins and necessarily political, because origins were so many thousands of years tied up with how to live, was tied directly to religion and strictures and dogmas and so on. So
you know, I have so many more questions coming up, but how are you preparing your mimosas?
Well, I'm just doing this. There's like a twist of a lemon in here, and then with the Mexican wine.
So it's only 2 ingredients. Excellent. Wow. And on my end, I'm cooking quinoa with can you see this here? It's hot. I don't want to spill it on my computer. Quinoa with milk, and then once it's slightly cooled down, you just pour some honey in it, and then you let it cool down. Then your quinoa pudding is yummy, and it's ready to go. Well, I mean, have you ever been religious?
No, never.
Not at all? Never.
No, and I like to say that, I mean, I was raised, like my parents are, but like, I like to call them, I don't know who came up with this, I think theists. Like, they like the idea of religion, but I actually don't think they were ever very committed to it or knew very much about it. But I was raised religiously. I mean, I was told there was God, and then I was told that this is how the universe worked, and I thought so. I mean, I thought so when my parents told me that the tooth fairy was fake, I was like, I know, it's okay. And then when they told me that Santa Claus was fake, I was like, I know, guys, this is cool. And I was waiting for them to tell me that the other thing was fake. And then they never did. And I was like, oh, but that's ridiculous. So for me, like, I very much reject it. It's not a, I don't even wish it were true. It is not a universe I would want to live in. I think it's a sort of, what Chris Hitchens said was a celestial dictatorship that I didn't ask to be born into. And so I don't like that idea, and I'm very happy that there's no reason to believe that it's true.
Yet you sometimes, when you create art, you use these, you know, artifacts in the exhibition. So how do you tie those together?
Well, because I think the role of the artist for thousands of years was this person who would channel the human inclination for the transcendent or for the sublime. and I still believe that's true. Like the artist helps sort of channel this human need for the sublime, for the numinous, and so I still want to recall that, do that. I'm moved, just like somebody who believes in God when they go stand in the Grand Canyon, or you know, look at the images of the Hubble Space Telescope. I'm moved. Exactly the same way. I just don't have the same ontology. So that's why those themes sort of come up sometimes. The evocative shapes.
And what is going to come up next for you? What is on your agenda as a next thing?
There are a few new series. One of them is super cool. I've done it's very traditional for artists to make self-portraits, which I always thought was like very fraught, and it's not necessarily something I wanted to do. So I approached Antonio Damasio and Hannah Damasio, who work at USC. They're at the heads of the Brain and Creativity Institute. Stellar neuroscientists.
Absolutely.
Really incredible people, and pitched this idea of a series of self-portraiture using the fMRI machines of the Brain and Creativity Institute. So it is me, but it's not my face. It's of my brain in different states. So wow. I wrote a I wrote a 2.5 hour script of different things to experience. So I'm really interested in the difference between the way the brain processes literal language and metaphorical language, because I think there's some higher level understanding that comes with metaphor. So there's parts of the script which is just a readout of Alan Turing's first computer manual, which is utterly literal. There is nothing in there that is a metaphor. It's like turn register 2 knobs, left.
Yeah.
Completely boring language. And then poetry thereafter, which is utterly metaphorical, and seeing what different areas in the brain light up. And this isn't meant to be a pedagogical project. It's really just about source and origins and method. But it's very beautiful. I mean, you get this 3D moving image of what the brain is doing that I can make moving like video sculptures out of, or I'm going to do some tapestries, I think, paintings of the structural things. And there's so much data from that one thing, from that one immersion in that machine, which was quite a long one. I mean, but it's not. I will never run out of ways to sort of.
That is really fascinating. Are you going to be using material that also ties back to what you have been doing, or is it entirely?
No, I think materials-wise. Because I don't think that works really for this concept.
Okay.
I mean, I guess the reality of it would be, the way that this information was extracted was by using an enormously powerful magnet. One that was so strong, actually, that my tattoos started to feel like they were coming out of my skin.
Ooh. I have a question, actually. So when you work on different projects, and this is more like a business type of question. When you work on different projects, and your fans, your collectors, your galleries, they expect a certain Landon Ross work. But let's say you want to totally break up with whatever you did before, materials-wise. Suddenly start doing instead of monumental things, like tiny things. And so what do you do when you want to reinvent your art, and how do you bring it to your audience?
I've never run into that. I don't think I have. I think everything that I've done pretty much has a thread through it. And that's not because I'm really trying to keep the thread. It's just kind of like everything that I make kind of has that thread just naturally. But I haven't run into that. I haven't run into people have different some people like the glitzier things, some people like the ones that are more conceptually sort of deep, and I just feel like that's pretty evenly distributed.
Awesome. That's really cool. So wait, I'm looking. Oh, there is a Landon. Did you grow up in the Hollywood scene? Did your parents collect art, and what did you study at UCLA?
So I was a fine art major at UCLA. It was a really, really, truly fantastic school. Loved my teachers. Really, really small. And yes, I did grow up in LA. There is always Hollywood around. It's not really my scene, but yeah, I think, well, no,
It's there.
I have lots of actor friends and musician friends, but people have this idea of LA as being like this Hollywood thing, and I have to say, like, my group of friends is journalists, scientists, producers, sure, actors, but chefs. I mean, like, it's really, really a multicultural city. I'm not speaking about multiculturalism in the way you would normally think, although it is that. I mean, like, it isn't a monoculture. It's not like SF where it's tech dominated or New York where it's finance dominated. It's really, there's so many different fields here that are thriving, and so our friends pretty distributed that way. And no, my parents have no capacity for either science or art or culture. They really, they're amazing, but I don't know why I came out this way. It's really an argument for it's a nature versus nurture sort of anecdotal.
Well, that's really fascinating. I mean, you're one of the most also artists in you're in every gene of you. You're an artist. I have never seen an artist more artist than you are. Well, because I remember, when we talk about it, your life is pretty much art, actually. So it's you live it. So it's really interesting that no background. And actually, there is another one last question. It's it's asking about the art on your body.
Okay.
So why did you have it applied? Did it need enhancing? Did your body need enhancing, or is it about enhancing?
No, that's a weird. That last part is a weird question. I mean, that's like saying, did your wall need enhancing?
Okay.
It's kind of like, no, I always liked tattoos, always thought about having them. And then after like a few years of thinking about having them, I was like, well, obviously I haven't changed my mind. Do that. What am I saving this for? Like, there's all this, and some of them mean things and other things mean nothing at all. I had my first tattoo ever was this, which I designed. It's Charles Darwin's portrait on a trump card, sort of like a playing card. And it's done very well. I mean, if you know the portrait of Darwin, like, this is his face. And then I have 3 Darwin tattoos, actually.
Oh, really? Wow.
His finch sort of deconstructed with this platonic shape that I use very often in my artwork. And then that's the beagle.
Beautiful.
And then other things, like, I mean, this is by like a French graffiti artist. I don't know if you can see it, named Fouzi, who's really not even a tattoo artist, I guess. And he just does these bad drawings, which I like really. I don't know. It's like rough technique. Like, it's not filled in properly. They're bad, and it's just, this means nothing at all.
When was the last time you had your last tattoo?
That was like 7 months ago.
Really? What was the last one?
Both of these.
Oh, wow.
So This is Prometheus chained to the mountain,
Oh my
and
God.
I didn't put the eagle picking out his liver because I already had the
Ah,
thing
okay.
right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then this is thistles.
Wow, amazing. I'm
Um,
going to have a look at whether how about digital art?
how about it?
Well, have you ever thought about doing digital art or art that only exists in the digital realm?
I haven't. I mean, I'm not. I don't. Wouldn't rule it out. Like for me, like it's what is the concept and what medium can I use to make to iterate the concept.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, like for instance, I haven't done anything for photographical or using photography, but it's not that I won't. It's just that I haven't had a need for it. So I wouldn't ever rule anything out like that. I haven't done anything digital.
Interesting. Well, I think this is the time where we kind of start telling jokes. Do you have a joke ready?
Oh, have a joke. And it's like, actually, this is weird. Some scientists should tell me why this happens. I can't remember jokes.
Oh, no.
You can ask me like the chemical name of something, and I'll tell you, even if it's ridiculous, like polysyllabic, whatever. But I can't remember jokes.
Do you find jokes funny at all? Probably that's the reason.
I do find jokes funny. Yeah. Um,
Then I'm just going to tell mine because my joke is really good
yes.
tonight. I'm proud of it. I tried it on Matthias and he was like, yeah, this is okay. Better than the ones that you've been telling. So, what does a dung beetle say when he enters a bar?
What?
Is this stool taken? Thank you for laughing. Well, Landon, I want to thank you so much for joining me tonight. This noontime at your place. You please remain on the line for after show party, and I'm just going to say goodbye to the people who were watching us. Good night to you, and guys, thank you so much for tuning in. At another episode of the Entrepreneur's Kitchen, and tomorrow, we'll go on. Who's my guest tomorrow? Sorry, just tune in on the website. You will find out. Stay on the line if you want to join our after show party. Bye bye.